MSN.com. Chinese fighters. What the capture of Chinese soldiers say about Beijing's role in Ukraine. Okay, so as we know, recently Zelensky has announced that 2 Chinese combatants, soldiers, have been captured, that their documents, bank cards, etc. have signified that it's Chinese soldiers fighting against Ukraine on the side of Russia. And it has created a lot of questions. I can see now this headline saying over 160 Chinese nationals fight for Russia in Ukraine. Obtained documents show. We're gonna take a quick look at this. At least 163 Chinese nationals are serving in Russia's armed forces as of early April, according to a Ukrainian intelligence document seen by the Kyiv Independent on April 9th. Okay. Another document showed photos and passport details of 13 Chinese recruits who are being selected for service in the Russian army as of April 2nd. Of course, this also in itself raises questions. Why would those people have those documents on them, right? Why would those people have all those documents that would identify them as Chinese citizens? That is one of the questions that automatically come to mind. Like, why would they have all that stuff on them when captured, right? There are 155 Chinese citizens who are fighting against Ukrainians on the territory of Ukraine. President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed this information to journalists on April 9th. We're just getting our facts straight right now. We're just gathering information. We're just trying to get to know what's going on. And then we'll be able to talk hypotheses. We're going to be able to talk scenarios as to why those soldiers are there, how the Chinese government is possibly involved, and all that good stuff. But for now, we're just getting information. At least 163 Chinese nationals got it. 13 passport details selected as for service. 55 Chinese citizens who are fighting against Ukrainians on the territory of Ukraine. Zelensky confirmed. So far, so good. We are collecting information. We believe that there are many more. For these 155, there is passport data, where they are from, their Chinese documents, age, etc. Zelensky added. According to Zelensky, Chinese soldiers had been serving with Russia's 70th Separate Guards Motor Rifle Brigade, the 255th Rifle Division, and others. Okay? A day before President Volodymyr Zelensky, I opened this segment with that. A day before President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the capture of 2 Chinese citizens fighting for Russia in eastern Donetsk Oblast. The group of 6 Chinese nationals clashed with Ukrainian forces, and 2 are now being held by the Security Service of Ukraine, SBU, he said. The documents obtained by the Kyiv Independent list the names, personal data, place of service, and position in the Russian army of other Chinese nationals. The captured Chinese soldiers have been identified as Wang Guanjun and Zhang Zhenbo, born in 1991 and 1998, respectively, a source told the Kyiv Independent. Wang Jun was captured near Bologorivka, Donetsk Oblast, while Renbo was captured near Tarasivka further north. One of the captured soldiers claimed he paid 300,000 rubles, $3,000 to a middleman in China to join the Russian military in exchange for the promise of citizenship. Ukraine's Luhansk military unit press service told Ukraine Pravda earlier in the day. Beijing knows about this. Russians distribute advertising videos about recruitment through Chinese social networks. So that is one possible explanation of why there are Chinese soldiers on Ukrainian territory. one very possible explanation. But there are more. Now let's go to that other article, okay? We've gathered the facts. Now let's go here, okay? The Chinese prisoner has a fearful expression, has his Ukrainian captors train a video camera on him. He speaks in Mandarin. He speaks in Mandarin, the common language of his homeland. Well, okay, Mandarin is not really the common language of China. There are actually many dialects of Chinese which wildly different one from the other, but let's just agree that Mandarin is pretty common and accepted. But saying that it's like a common language for the homeland is not exactly accurate. I feel like a nitpicker, but this has to be said, even though it has nothing to do with the argumentation of the article itself. His green uniform is like any regular soldiers, but is it proof that China is fighting alongside the Russian army? That in itself is not. That in itself is actually not evidence that the Chinese government is directly supporting Russia by sending troops. Just to be clear. Like the case of North Korea is far more clear-cut, okay? The case of North Korea is far more obvious. This is a hybrid war, and while China has not disputed the facts, the boundaries of truth are cloaked in deniability. The incident, assertedly publicized by Ukraine just as America is in a trade showdown with China, has illuminated the shadows of a very modern conflict. President Volodymyr Zelensky said his troops captured 2 Chinese citizens after a skirmish in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine. They found identity documents, bank cards, and other evidence of their nationality. In most armies, that would be a severe security lapse. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, why bank cards? That baffles me the most, that the captured soldiers had bank cards on them. What is the purpose of carrying a bank card with you to the front line? Zelensky said his men engaged with a unit of 6 Chinese combatants. The fate of the other 4 was not mentioned. Andriy Kovalenko, a member of the National Security and Defense Council, called the captured fighters mercenaries, but gave no more information. So basically, mercenaries would mean that they came to fight for Russia independently of the Chinese state. That would be the implication here, if they were mercenaries, that they were working independently of China, wouldn't it? Wouldn't that be the assumption? One explanation is that the men are simply soldiers of fortune who caught a plane to Russia to escape boredom and penury at home, or to gain the citizenship. That was also one of the floated hypotheses. Just days ago, the correspondent of Le Monde in China, the highly experienced Harold Tribolt, published an interview with a 37-year-old truck driver named Fen, who went to seek adventure until he was wounded by a drone. Jesus Christ. If you're bored, there are different ways to, deal with that. I feel like there are better ways, there are better first choices to dealing with boredom than just deciding, okay, I'm just gonna enlist with a foreign army and go to war. Don't you think? But I guess different strokes for different folks. I guess for some people, certain things are just not enough. They need certain amount of thrill that regular activities that just cannot give you. Back in China, sipping tea, he told Tribolt that he did not care about the rights and wrongs of the war. Oh, yeah, he just went there for the thrill, I guess. A search of a popular Chinese social media app, Douyin, revealed 40 accounts of men who had joined the Russian forces. Fans said there were hundreds. It is plausible that there are tens of thousands of trained soldiers hanging around in civilian life with not much to do. President Xi Jinping has spent heavily to modernize the People's Liberation Army, PLA, but he has also ruthlessly thinned its ranks. It is a leaner force with less manpower and more warfighting technology. So it's less about the numbers and more about the quality, which ironically enough is the opposite of Russia. Russia is all about the numbers, swarming the enemy with its special contingents, but its equipment is not the highest standard. True. In War and Peace. That lends weight to a second explanation, which is that Chinese military intelligence is using mercenaries to collect battlefield information on tactics and weapon systems that the PLA wants. It has not fought a conventional ground war since 1979, when the paramount leader Deng Xiaoping ordered an invasion of Vietnam, which ended in a fiasco. It ended in a fiasco, but not exactly. The war with Vietnam is a little bit more complicated than that. It actually is a lot more complicated than that. It didn't just end in a fiasco, but I'm not gonna get into that. So real-time observation in combat is priceless. The campaign in Ukraine, with its reliance on drones, cruise missiles, air defenses, tracking and interception, is a model for the sort of war fighting the PLA would experience in an invasion of Taiwan. Well, also the invasion of Taiwan would include things that the invasion of Ukraine does not. And that is, well, getting to the island, dropships, getting the troops to the island via transportation ships, which was not a problem for Russia because Russia is just directly connected to Ukraine by land. So there are certain parameters that would go into a war of China with Taiwan that just don't exist in the war between Ukraine and Russia. In addition, battlefield conditions yield performance assessments which the Russians might prefer to keep secret even from their supposed friends. And it is clear from Zelensky's statement that the 6 Chinese combatants were operating as an organized unit, presumably including Russian speakers for communications and, perhaps eavesdropping. Well, interesting. I know that this sort of thing happens on the side of Ukraine as well. I know that there's a lot of experimentation happening. A lot of new ground is being broken. For example, medics that go to Ukraine from Poland, volunteer medics that go to the front line from Poland, usually spending their own money to go there to buy medical supplies to help soldiers take their experiences from the battlefield in Ukraine and take it back to Poland, which creates this feedback loop where Poland is creating new medical facilities based on how field medicine is practiced in warfare. And based on that, Poland has started training Ukrainian soldiers so that they can do basic medical things, basic medical treatment to themselves or their colleagues on the spot when there is not a medic available. This became a harsh necessity of the war. Soldiers, just regular soldiers, being able to do certain basic medical procedures. Because there's just not always soldiers available. There's just not always medics available to stabilize a person. So soldiers need to have certain basic skills of their own when it comes to this. And of course, there is the whole testing how weapon system work, drone warfare. That information is conveyed back to the West. The West is learning a whole lot during this war. China has supplied the Kremlin with significant quantities of machine tools, drone and turbojet engines, and technology for cruise missiles, microelectronics, and nitrocellulose, which is used in rocket fuel. US officials in the Joe Biden administration said in April 2024. A third and less subtle explanation is simply that China is staging a brazen, barely covered intervention in the war. It has history on this. A US diplomat in Beijing once told me that sometimes Chinese strategy is as subtle as the ancient arts of war taught by Sun Tzu, but sometimes it's a kick in the face. Okay? In the Korean War of 1950 to 1933, the Chinese intervention there was quite direct and blatant. And if it wasn't for that Chinese intervention, the South would most probably have won. Then again, that happened because of the US intervention, but that's neither here nor there, okay? The US supported the South. They pushed the North all the way near the Chinese border. China said, oh, no. And then supported the North and pushed the South back. And we are where we are, okay? It led to the whole stalemate. And technically speaking, we are to this day operating on that stalemate. So Korean War, 1950, 1953, Mao Zedong sent hundreds of thousands of volunteers, quote unquote, to fight American, British, and other forces under the United Nations flag who were defending capitalist South Korea. Among the mass casualties was Mao's own son. China also sent covert aid to North Vietnam and to Viet Cong guerrillas in South Vietnam, helped the Khmer Rouge take over Cambodia, and waged a twilight struggle against both the Soviet Union and the West across Indochina until Deng called a halt to Cold War adventurism at the end of the 1970s. Its leaders are well schooled in complexity and state deceit, so they will have been unworried when the Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andriy Sybiha summoned China's charge d'affaires to Kiev to condemn this fact and demand an explanation. I mean, this is very symbolic in my opinion. I'm not sure what sort of explanation is expected of China. China is verifying the information with the Ukrainian side. A spokesperson for China's foreign ministry, Ling Jian, told reporters, "Let me stress that the Chinese government always asks Chinese nationals to stay away from areas of armed conflict, avoid any form of involvement in armed conflict, and in particular avoid participation in any party's military operations." I mean, that is a thing that any country will say, although other countries will also say avoid going there for tourist reasons. But yeah, what other response would you expect from China, even if it was true that China was covertly sending troops to fight on Russia's side? What would an official, a representative of China say? Yeah, we're doing that. Yeah, of course we're sending troops. Of course we're doing this volunteer thing. Of course. What do you mean? From news to politics, travel to sport, culture to climate, The Independent has a host of free newsletters to suit your interests. But yes, free big hypothesis. We have no clue which is the most probable. The Chinese soldiers could be just independent people that have decided to go there out of boredom. It could be the allure of gaining the Russian citizenship, although I'm not exactly sure what that allure is supposed to be. All things considered, considering the Russian economy and how Russia treats its immigrants once they actually arrive in Russia. But it could be that China is sending soldiers to gather information directly from the front to get back to China. And it could also be that, similar to the Korean War, they're sending volunteers to bolster the ranks of Russia. Which hypothesis you subscribe to, I leave to you. I guess we will have to see and wait how this story develops, because I'm pretty sure we will be seeing and hearing updates to this soon. I'm pretty sure that this is not just a one-off. I'm pretty sure that this story will develop, and once we know more, we will be able to talk more. We'll be able to make more broader statements. But I actually thought that this was worth at least a mention. I thought it would be a good idea to at least speak about this briefly. To just kept in the loop.